All right. Good morning, Jen. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing good. I have my little space heater on. I have a little Amazon remote control that goes with it. It's very handy. I can just, turn it on and off when I get cold.
Fancy. Our neighbors just got RC cars, remote control cars. It reminded me. So now the kids are obsessed with RC cars and things like that. So we are not there yet. However, I think that will be on the wish list in time to come. And wild and well, listeners, thank you for joining us today. It's another episode of Her Huddles. This week, we are going to talk about the stories we tell ourselves. This idea of quiet scripts that shape how we see our worth, our relationships, and our place in the world. Many of these narratives were written long before we had power to question them, and some still limit who we believe we can be. Together, we'll slow down, name the stories that no longer fit, add practical options and opportunities to engage, and then also reflect on what's the awareness that we have for our own stories and those around us, and remaining curious in learning stories of ourselves and each other. Jen, what do you have for us for word of the week?
So, our word of the week comes from Latin and it is fabula vitae. So, it literally means the fable or story of life. It captures the self narrative concept elegantly, and you could use it like in a poetic way to express the stories we tell ourselves about our lives.
Fabula vitae?
Vitae.
Vitae. Okay, Latin. I need to learn Latin. I did not take Latin.
Same.
I love this idea though of fable and stories because we
Mhm.
grew up on them. And I think about the different from like European stories to indigenous stories to stories that were taught from my grandparents. I have no idea where they came from. Even the story of Santa Claus and Saint Nick, or some of those other, if you're listening with your kids, I won't get into any further, but just where do our stories that shape culture as a whole come from?
Yeah,
So this makes it sound fancy, and I kind of like that for
I
this
know.
this Monday mornings. Fabula vitae.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna work on that. The fables are the stories.
Mhm.
Leading then into the stories that we grew up with, I'm gonna bring an unpopular this week. I go to, and this is a hard list, but I've come to the place of my go-to childhood stories or fables. Top characters are from 100 Acre Woods, Pooh Bear, Piglet, Tigger, Good Old Rabbit, and Christopher Robin. Oh, can't forget Eeyore. So Winnie the Pooh is the top childhood stories and fables for me.
Okay.
What would you say for you?
I have to say, I think from a story or a book perspective, the one that stands out to me is Love You Forever. And, it's that book with sort of like the light blue cover. There's a kid with toilet paper near a toilet, something
Lie?
on the cover.
That's what that means. That's a 90s book.
Yeah, but that was definitely a staple of my childhood and story that I heard over and over growing up, which is beautiful.
So good. This idea of a mother taking care of her child, and then as she ages, ultimately he actually cares for her. But oh, tearjerker, my
Yeah,
baby you'll be. Yeah, so good. That was a staple. We talked about Goodnight Moon,
they're
where
a
the
good one.
wild things are. So many in our
Oh,
childhood.
where the wild things are. That is such a fun one.
Yes. Which he's kind of naughty. Like as I've read it to my own kids, I'm like, oh, I don't like, I hold it in sincere regard, and then I read it and like, "Oh, that was kinda harsh," or "He was whiny," or whatever. Children's books hold a lot of weight, Disney characters, we didn't even get into those, Aesop's fables.
Uh-huh.
So this idea of what are even some of the books that we read of childhood that hold deep nostalgia, that give us stories that resonate with us to this day, and then
Mhm.
also what are the stories that we wish we didn't read or no longer align with. And I
Yeah.
feel like that, although a fun thing in unpopular opinions, also reflects back the stories we tell in our heads and the stories we live out and say, do I still align with that? Do I not? Where did this come from? What's the origin? And then how do I either recreate or leave behind a story that no longer serves me? Where do you sit as far as storytelling, the impact on your own life?
I do think about this topic, the stories we tell ourselves, and awareness seems like a key connection point or prerequisite almost to the topic in the sense that, I mean, even as we were prepping for this, I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know what stories I tell myself. Like, I can't, think of anything. And I'm like, okay, BS. If you dig a little bit, you can find something. Just maybe that's sort of like a gap in my own awareness of like what my inner monologue or inner narrative looks like. And maybe I'm not super in tune with that at the moment. I think I ebb and flow at certain points. I think that there is a degree of sort of self-awareness or mindfulness that is necessary to really dig into this topic and make it valuable and sort of move the needle. I definitely, over the course of, especially, I don't know, I'll call it the last 3 to 5 years, I would say there have been some big topics for me in this stories I tell myself that I have had to redirect and course correct. And that's hard. It's hard because in the process of identifying and being aware of a story you tell yourself, and then second, to course correct it or edit it, there's a lot of context and life conditioning and social conditioning, familial conditioning. I think that is probably so attached to many of these things and the way we talk to ourselves internally.
Can relate to that. An example that's coming up as you're sharing that is from familial. I'm a middle child and I lean into that. If you look at the three of us, I'm the monogamist. Is that cart or the horse, chicken or the egg? I don't know, right? Like, did I take that on? Because I would also say I'm the bridger of many things, and that's also tends to be a middle child role.
Uh-huh.
And there's so much research in where these come from, and at the same time, how true are they actually?
Right.
Nonetheless, it's the if we go into that topic of honoriness, is it that I'm a little extra spicy because I'm a middle child? Did that nurture or nature me, right? Like, and
Right.
in that, I think it transformed, and we'll get into some more depth, going from middle child honoriness or pushing the limits into then when I tore my ACL, when I had a relationship, long term relationship that fractured it poorly, I started to think mine wasn't I'm a failure, mine is I'm broken. That is
Mm,
the story when I'm honest with myself,
mm,
that plays over and over and over is I am broken. And I've
yeah.
done a lot of good work, and this is why I believe in the power of counseling. This is why I believe in the power of storytelling and rewriting our narratives, whether it's physically on paper or it's doing so with a therapist, someone professional, to rewrite those narratives that play, how to edit, right? That's something that you just brought up is how to edit. And so from teen years when I tore my ACL and I no longer played soccer, which was such an identity piece for me, sports, to then getting back up on the bike and doing triathlons and then having another knee surgery in college and then gaining weight and just different things. It was like, I'm broken here, I'm broken there. And then the emotional, I'm broken here, I'm broken there. And here's the other piece that I think awareness allows it allows us to move from victim mindset to victor mindset.
Yeah.
And that's powerful to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to take back my story and not sit in I'm this middle child nuisance, and my parents and my siblings love me well. I do wanna put that out there. I feel very
For sure.
fortunate that I was able to, and also, if you ask them, they'll dog on me and say, "Ah, it's because she's a middle child, she's adopted."
Did you ever see Cheaper by the Dozen?
Mhm.
Okay. So my again also came from a very loving family, although this story would make you think otherwise. There were four of us, and I have a different dad than my other three siblings, and we watched Cheaper by the Dozen as a family one year. And there's one kid that is named FedEx because he looks and is so different from the rest of them. And my family started calling me FedEx.
Yeah. And so
Oh,
sometimes okay, let's go into that. I wanna honor our families and stuff, and also the truth of it is we can laugh because I know I am loved and I'm
yes.
secure, because
Yes.
those narratives have played out in other ways. However, when I'm insecure or in teenage years, that would hit me to the core of,
Yeah.
do they actually like me? Am I
Right.
worthy of these siblings?
Yeah.
And I'm the only brunette. My siblings are both blonde. Like, is what it is. So looks wise, there's some differences. Now, I mean, look at my sister and I, we look the same, basically just different hair color. But there's just those different components. And so these are examples of the narratives that other people put on us that we don't have control over. And yet
Right.
in our insecurities, they show up in certain ways. And then also that's the freedom of love to say, y'all are little like,
Yes.
and we can laugh and we can say, let me dog on you sometimes too, because I know it comes from love. So I think that that's the power also of like, not just canceling and cutting out people, because that can happen too. But we know when it comes from love, when stories come from love, there's so much uplifting power. And when they don't, man, it stings and
Yes.
it hits in the darkest of moments too.
Yeah. And even when they do come from love, there can be an unintended meaning associated to the receiver, that no one is meaning. But
Yeah.
yes, I think your point about how in my insecurity that then shows up. When we're
Totally.
joking and I feel fully loved and I'm feeling good, that's not showing up. But when I'm feeling insecure, that does come up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even today, this morning, Nick is helping me. He's a phenomenal business guy. And so I brought up questions of merging, of opportunities to come for Wild and Well together. And I brought up, hey, what are your thoughts on this merging? And I asked it very directly and I was asking a specific thing. And I didn't feel heard in his response. I felt like he was answering something that was unrelated.
Okay.
And Nick has asked me to be direct and give specifics. So I was very direct and gave very specific, and it felt like rejection and like I just shut the door on him. And he was not expecting that because normally I am gentle and soft and intentional, rather, and deliberate
Mhm.
with my delivery. And
Okay.
I'm aware of it. The tone matters.
Yeah.
This morning, whether it's because of lack of sleep, whether it's because I hadn't eaten yet, whether just because I wanted the answer to move on and get the kids ready to go to school, whatever it was, the delivery was terrible on my part, and Nick's a kind man, and so he held that space for me, and then he, like, back to and he's like, "Yikes." Like, or he brought up that reflection, that mirror to me, the delivery matters, and the tone in which we deliver them matter immensely.
Yes.
Let's go into the story bearing. I think that that's
Yeah. Yeah.
this idea of we are the narrator, not the character, or we are the author, not the characters. The tone, the language, and the inner monologue. How do we view how we say that and how that influences our own confidence and connection with others,
Hmm.
and also how we love others well?
I think about this in like a three-part way, I guess. First is whether we know it or we like it or we call it this or not. I do believe we are all story bearers. We all have stories in our hearts, minds, bodies that have happened to us that we've made happen over the course of our life. And then second is I think some of us engage with those stories and tell those stories, whether that's outwardly or internally. And I think that's some of where that awareness comes in. I do think we all do it internally, whether we are aware of it or not. And then some of us are better at also telling those stories and communicating those things externally in the friendship circles and spheres in which we operate. And then the third part in my mind is more bi-directional. Like, how do I show up for my friends
Mm.
and sit with them and their stories and help be curious or interrogate or question the stories that they tell themselves that they need or want or benefit from a trusted friend or curious sort of thought partner. And some of those things, I do think that this idea of storytelling, it can be emotionally dense once you get into it. And I've always found when I have friends that are beside me or with me and are able to bring that curiosity, like, why are you talking to yourself like that? Why are you viewing that interaction that way? I'm curious where that comes from. Do you think it could be XYZ? I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. It's
Yeah.
almost like that. I think that third part of sort of bi-directional being with friends and loved ones in that way is a real gift, like in the human experience.
And it's probably been ingrained. We need to do many more sessions on storytelling and the power of moving through shame based storytelling, moving through the reels that play in our head, to also then the freedoms that we have and the connections to one another. Because for thousands of years, that has been how we connected with other humans, was through story. Not even written word, not movies, not all these cool TikToks and all the fun, stimulating things that we have now. But, and even those are storytelling stories.
Yeah.
And so music, right, tells such incredible stories. Dance tells phenomenal stories. How do we use stories to tell ourselves how to live a better life and also to connect to others and hear
Mm.
their living, the grief, the hardship, and then also that victorious journey of the warrior of saying, oh, this is where I was, start at the bottom, now we here, right? Like that's like that genuine journey is so powerful and relatable. And it can happen in the work sphere, it can happen in family, it happens in individual, again, mind and body experiences. And so that idea of, I like how you did the three part and maybe even four of awareness first, right? Like you
Mhm.
originally brought up, is
Yeah.
what is that self reflection that then takes me on this journey to ultimately hearing other people's stories. And
Yeah.
sometimes I would offer, we show up with a mask and or I show up with a mask and I'm like, I don't have the energy to tell my own story. Let
Yeah.
me ask a question to someone else. Let me remain curious because as soon as I remain curious, I say, "Hey Jen, tell me about Christmas when you were in elementary school."
Mhm.
Things start to come to mind, and the more specific I can get in my question asking, the more details that will come about. And
Yeah.
if you don't want to share, right? Like that's part of relationships. However, if I remain curious, then at a very high level, more surface level, it's like, oh yeah, Christmas, da 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 da. And then I'm like, oh, tell me stories about how you and your siblings related when you were growing up. Or tell me what it was like with your dad, right? And I start to
Yeah.
we get deeper and deeper. Or, hey, what's one of the hardest things you ever had to do in high school? Now we're getting into the depth and we can keep like pulling back those onions. And often when we tell stories and internally, it's to dog on ourselves. It's to hurt ourselves. It's to say, oh, I'm not worth it. Or one of those harsh I am statements. The more we can break those up and start to turn them into positive, the healthier we are. And we'll get into the editing again in a minute. The other side, though, is when we say it outwards, often we're the heroes of our stories and we forget about the supporting characters.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of arrogant too. And I'm like,
Right?
this girl, da 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 da, or oh, I was the champion of this team, or I handled this really, really well. And then I'm like, wait. We both handled it in the ways that we did. We both are equal players. How do we show that interdependence that we talked about a couple weeks back? While I'm individual in my own story, it also is at play with other people, with work, with relationships, with faith, with all those different things. So
Yep.
I think that both those things are true of in that arc of those three or four coming from individual to social beings and how I relate and remain curious with others is how do I look for the beauty of others and
Mhm.
give them the best foot forward opportunity and also how do I sit with them? How do I hold space for them? And equally then how do I hold space for myself and really have gentleness in my head and heart towards the journey that I'm on? What about this idea then of the editing our script?
I guess what most commonly happens, like what you said, a lot of the under this theme of the stories we tell ourselves, a lot of this comes from or is negative stories we tell ourselves. And I think about things, simple things, like the difference of, I'm at work, I did something bad, I addressed the email to the wrong person, and it was a really important person, and my inner dialogue to myself, am I saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. I can't believe I just did that. Like, I suck." Or is it, "I just made a mistake?" And how different those two things are. What strikes me just in that example, "I am a failure" or "I suck" versus "I made a mistake" is the crux of identity. Like, I am a failure and I'm reinforcing an identity based narrative in my head that I'm a failure and I identify with being a failure, which is not true. It is true that I made a mistake. And the detachment, I think, of identity there is so powerful and pervasive that those types of just like, that's such a small example, but how many times, even just in that, like I am a failure versus I made a mistake, how often do we all do that? At what points of our life, like have we had that kind of self-talk? And I think that is really interesting to unpack. Why do I jump to, "Oh my gosh, I'm such a failure"? Why do I do that? Why do we do that?
I don't have that answer. That's something that I look forward to exploring and as we go through 2026 is
And we
why
may all have different answers, I guess, too.
totally, but we do all do that where we take identity and we then extrapolate it to this is me, fully unchangeable. When we make an I am statement, it says I am in this box. This is
Mm,
true to my identity, to my core. Whereas
yeah,
when we make a verb related statement, which would be I made a mistake.
yeah,
I forgot to send this to this person. I
yeah,
sent this to the wrong person. That says I have control on my outcome moving forward.
yeah,
I am not held in this box in contempt. This is not true to who I am,
yeah,
part of my identity, but rather this is a mistake or a component of this action that I made. Therefore,
yes,
moving forward, and so it gives us control. And so
yes.
that's, I don't know the why of why do we, I'd be curious, please, any neuropsychologist or whatnot, or whomever, please send in why do we say I am statements? I don't know the history of that, of where I am statements came from. What I do know though is the disposition between a verb related engagement and an identity related statement are two very different things. like
Yeah.
you've said. And so the more we can say in anything, for example, for me, I could say, I'm a crappy friend. I forget my friend's birthday, right?
Yeah.
So I say, I'm a crappy friend. Instead, I say, I forgot her birthday. Let me text her happy belated birthday and I can joke and I can throw, I can have a self deprecating thing if I
Yeah.
want, or I can just own it and say, hey, I missed your birthday. I hope you know how loved you are. You matter so much to me. And it's not trite, it's still very joy filled and very honest and genuine.
Real. Yeah.
But it's, hey, I'm so sorry, owning it, right? There's also a refreshing component to people in 2025, 2026 who can say, I'm sorry, or own the mistake, right? Because then
Totally.
it says, if you own your mistakes, that gives me permission to own mine. Or if you're able to work through your hard stuff, well, that gives me permission to work through my hard stuff. Or in my own head of if I no longer say I'm attached to that I am statement, if
Mm.
that's not the core of who I am, because I don't believe myself to be a crappy friend, you can say, dang, I missed the mark there. How do I move forward and talk about progress or being versus becoming, a previous one that we talked about? How do I say my being is as a friend who cares deeply about those closest to her?
Mhm.
I missed the mark here and forgot about a birthday. How then do I make sure to create a calendar? How do I use practical tools? That's a friendship one that says we don't have to hurt ourselves and beat ourselves up over and over again by these reels that play in our head
Yeah.
when we will miss the mark. That's also human nature to miss the
Totally.
mark.
Another common one is the classic sort of you're texting with somebody or you're in touch with somebody, friend, family, whoever, and they don't text back or they don't call you back or they don't get back to you in some way. And the story I tell myself is I'm not worth the effort or I'm not worth their time versus more the fact or the action, which is they didn't text back and sort of removing the other part of that statement, which is, and I'm not worth the effort. It's just like the fact is they didn't text back, period. It can be a period. And we just
Yeah.
sort of leave it there versus me storytelling in my head, like, oh my gosh, they hate me, or I'm not worth the effort, or they don't want anything to do with me. It's like, I don't know that. They just didn't text back.
Mhm.
That's another hard one I have.
Uh,
I work through that a lot.
which thank you for your grace because I'm terrible at texting. The more that people know me, know that I am terrible at texting. In that, so I volunteer to work with kids. And through that application process at the place, I had to give references. And one of the references, they had to share like what's a struggle or what's something that we need to be aware of Becca. And so she gave me this beautiful, all these positive things. For that one section, she said, don't text her, call her, know that she will get back to you within a couple hours if you call her. If you text her, you may not hear from her for weeks. And I was like, I'm so glad that you know me that well, Patience, to say that because that is true. And it has nothing to do. I'm not on my phone that much. I'm terrible at texting. I don't prioritize it. Or I'm like, yeah, I'll get back to that. And so how do I come back to a place of like, they process that differently. There's a
Mhm.
reason for it, giving them benefit of the doubt. And again, coming back to that calmer disposition of curiosity. Curiosity calms us.
Yeah.
I'd be curious. This would be a question back. Is there a time when having a curious disposition does not calm the situation? Because I would
Mm.
argue that that is the antidote to a lot of our tension that we have with ourselves and with people is curiosity and wonder.
Yeah.
All right. So the reels that we tell ourselves, they come from origin stories prior to us. We have power to control them. We can
Mhm.
use different tools. CBT is one professionally. We can also take those reels that play over and over again and interrupt them in getting outside, doing different activities, sharing them out loud, naming them, right? Becoming aware of them, like you said,
Yeah.
and then rewriting the script, being the editor and the author rather
Mm.
than the character of our stories.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you have? Otherwise, I'll take us into 60 seconds to centered.
I think the final point in my mind that feels really valuable on this topic is to take a moment to pause and think about the trusted and safe friends, family, people in your life that you can do this with or try this with if you haven't already. Thinking about who those people are and how you can be a curious companion to them and the stories they tell themselves and how they can be a curious companion to you and the stories you tell yourself. I think that curious companionship, I would say, is a good thing to just think about for yourself and helping make this feel practical and exploring this with people that feel safe.
Yes. Both and. Who's in my life and who can I be that for
Yeah.
in their lives too. Beautiful. All right, 60 seconds to center then is find just a comfortable seat or wherever you are. Take a slow breath in and let it out gently. Body listens to the stories before it listens to logic. So when we tell ourselves a story that feels threatening, the body responds as if it's real. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, breath shortens. Stress chemicals move through the body, not because something is happening, but because the story says it is. Now, here's the shift: the body doesn't react to truth, it reacts to meaning. So place a hand on your body or your heart and take one steady breath in and then out. Let your nervous system soften just a little. And as the body settles, the mind becomes more flexible. And from this place, you can choose a new story, one that says, I'm safe enough right now. Inhale again, exhale out a little bit softer. You're not changing the past, you're updating the meaning of where you are now. And then
Mm.
come back to that breath. Come back to that natural breath. Come back to whatever you need to do throughout your day. This is a way to gently soften where we're at and bring the nervous system back to a more regulated space, as you said, with safety and calm, Jen. What about for you? What is the journal prompt we're leaving people with?
Journal prompt is, what is a story I keep telling myself about who I am or what I can do? Is it helping me or holding me back, and why?
Mhm. A practical solution then follows that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story I keep telling myself? Who I am or what I can do?
Mm-hmm.
Is it helping me or holding me back? And why? Bringing that awareness into the space. All right, wild ones, please share out what your favorite books are, your favorite childhood fables and stories. We hope that you engage with us next week. Thanks for joining the huddle. We'll see you next Monday.
Bye, everybody.